We are live. Sergeants, can we please start the recordings?
PC started.
Cloud rolling.
Backup is rolling.
Good morning and welcome to today's remote fiscal 2023 preliminary budget hearing for the Committee on Oversight and Investigation. At this time, we ask that members and staff please turn on their video for verification purposes. To minimize disruptions throughout the hearing, please place cell phones and electronic devices to vibrate or silent. If you have testimony you wish to submit for the record, you may do so via email at testimony.council.nyc.gov. Once again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. We thank you for your cooperation. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to the fiscal 2023 preliminary budget hearing for the Committee on Oversight and Investigations. I'm Gail Brewer. I'm chair of the committee. And today we will review the Department of Investigation's fiscal 23 budget to understand how it addresses the needs of New Yorkers to improve the way New York operates. Not an easy task. The Department of Investigation, also known as DOI, promotes and maintains integrity and efficiency in government operations across New York City. DOI's fiscal 23 preliminary budget totals $49.2 million, including $28 million for personal services to support 330 positions and $21.2 million for other than personal services. Obviously, this is an agency that works with people. I would like to welcome and congratulate Commissioner Strauber on her appointment as commissioner. She did a great job when she testified before us as part of the advice and consent of the City Council. And the city and the department are in a unique position to proactively attack corruption, fraud, and waste in many areas, including the city's increase in federal funds throughout the pandemic, which is something that comes up often. As city employees continue to return to in-person work, there is an opportunity to educate the workforce on DOI's role in this area, as well as workers' rights as whistleblowers, because we want people to understand what the agency does, and we want people to use it if appropriate, but we hope that there isn't any corruption, fraud, and waste. I look forward to continuing our fruitful discussions with beneficial oversight hearings. We have a lot of work ahead. We all have to hold public officials accountable ourselves, ensuring public money is spent lawfully, and building faith in honest government. That's actually a hard task. I'm interested today in learning about the commissioner's plans for the department, potential challenges, and DOI's role within the city as an oversight entity, as well as how we can work together to improve the department's staffing. This plan did not include any new needs, and if there are, we should hear about them, and decreased the department's fiscal 23 budget by 1.5 million and 33 positions. I remain concerned that the budget is not sufficiently funded and would like to further discuss this at the hearing today. The committee would also like to discuss this and other budgetary changes in the Adams administration's first budget to understand the vision the administration has for the department. It is my first budget hearing as chair of the committee, but it's not my first committee chairing in the City Council. That's a long story. I look forward to learning more about the department and the important role that DOI plays in New York and the first of many successful hearings. I want to thank our committee staff, Senior Financial Analyst Jack Kern, Deputy Director Aisha Wright, Senior Counsel CJ Murray, Senior Policy Analyst Noah Mixler, and my Chief of Staff Schuler Hooter. And now I'd like to thank Commissioner Strauber, the department's investigators, background investigators, and inspectors general for the work that they do. I'm looking forward to hearing from the commissioner, and I know there are some very special colleagues, and I appreciate everybody who's on this committee. I saw Councilmember Yeager, I see Councilmember Joseph, Councilmember Velasquez, and Councilmember Ayala. I believe that's it at this time, and I'm sure others will be joining us. So I will turn it back over to you, Sergeant, because I'm sure you want to swear in the wonderful commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is CJ Murray. I'm counsel to the Committee on Oversight and Investigations. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you're called on to testify. at which point you'll be unmuted by a member of our staff. Please note that if you mute yourself after we have unmuted you, we will need to unmute you again before you are able to speak, and there may be a slight delay as we work to do so. Council members, if you'd like to ask a question during the hearing, please use the Zoom raise hand function, and I will call on you in order. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes, which includes the time it takes the panelists to answer your questions. I will now administer the oath. Commissioner Strauber and Deputy Director Morales, please raise your right hand. I'll read the oath once and then call on each of you individually for a response. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions? Commissioner Strauber?
I do.
Deputy Director Morales? Do we have Deputy Director Morales?
I don't believe we were expecting the Deputy Director.
Okay. Commissioner Strauber, you may begin your testimony.
Just before you start, Commissioner, I just want to say, I wanted to welcome Councilmember Williams, and I think Councilmember Juan is not here because I believe she had a baby yesterday, and I think that's a legitimate excuse. Commissioner, it's all yours.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair Brewer and members of the Committee on Oversight and Investigations. My name is Jocelyn Strauber, and I'm the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Investigation. As you know, I have been in this role just over 2 weeks, but in that short time, I have been able to meet members of the staff, to familiarize myself with the structure of the agency, and to begin to dig into the many ongoing investigations. I have much more to learn, but I am already inspired by the people that I have met here and the important work that they are doing. I want to emphasize to this committee how honored and humbled I am to have an opportunity to lead this agency that has been serving New York City, protecting it from corruption and misconduct, and safeguarding public funds for nearly 150 years. That mission has never been more critical as the city continues to grapple with the social and financial impact of the pandemic. DOI's investigations, as you know, can result in various civil and criminal enforcement actions. DOI also makes policy and procedure recommendations to improve city operations and to address corruption vulnerabilities that we have identified through our investigations. The New York City Charter establishes DOI's independence. The dedicated DOI staff ensures that we act with independence in the investigative work that we do every day. At DOI, we follow the facts wherever they lead, without fear or favor, and regardless of the nature or identity of the subjects involved. And we strive to maintain the highest standard of ethics and fairness in the conduct of our investigations. We seek to be as transparent as possible with the public about our work without compromising our investigative mission. As a former federal prosecutor, like many of the DOI commissioners before me, a commitment to DOI's crucial independence and to doing the right thing in the right way for the right reasons guides my leadership of this agency. Today, I'd like to speak with you about the reductions DOI has made to its budget in fiscal year 2022 and 2023 and the impact of those reductions. I will also highlight some of DOI's high priority work, and I'll share with you my preliminary plans for the agency, which include building our investigative ranks and strengthening our organizational structure to improve retention of our investigators, a key to our success. After consulting with my executive team, I believe these improvements are necessary for DOI to best accomplish its mission. I want to be upfront with you that these improvements will require additional staff and a new promotional structure for investigators that will cost approximately $1.3 million. This additional funding would make a very significant contribution to DOI's ability to do its work at an optimal level, both now and in the future. Please know that I appreciate the tough financial times that we are in and that virtually all agencies are being asked to cut back. But I believe it is important for this committee to understand from DOI's perspective what we feel is needed to best meet the city's needs. I'd like to start with a review of DOI's budget numbers as they now stand, which provide essential context for the budget reductions we have made and our requests for additional funding. There are new needs requests, as Chair Brewer alluded to, and I will go through those with you today. DOI's current expense budget for fiscal year 2022 is $58.2 million. $29.4 million of that number is personal services. As you know, that's salaries for DOI staff. 517 employees report through DOI's chain of command. About half of those positions are funded by DOI's budget, and the remainder through financial arrangements with other city agencies or public authorities. The fiscal year 2022 budget includes $28.8 million for other than personal services, essentially our expenditures other than salaries. $3 million of that funds a mayoral initiative to conduct a comprehensive review of city-funded nonprofit homeless service providers. The funds are used to hire 2 integrity monitors, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. The fiscal year 2022 budget numbers I just discussed include reductions to DOI's budget of nearly $1.2 million, made in connection with the city's most recent program to eliminate the gap. That reduction is in addition to DOI's previous reduction commitment in fiscal year 2022 of $490,000 for a total savings of approximately $1.7 million in fiscal year 2022. As the chair alluded to, DOI has no programs to cut, so to meet the bulk of our budget reductions over the years, we had no other choice but to cut staff. And in fiscal year 2022, we therefore achieved savings by cutting our full-time staff positions from 385 to 352, eliminating 33 positions that were vacant due to staff attrition, but that we had otherwise planned to fill. And that is on top of the 20 additional positions we lost due to other reduction requests in 2022. So that means in the past 2 years, DOI has lost a total of 53 positions. These cuts will result in reductions to our budget until at least 2026, and along with other surpluses realized in our budget, these reductions will help us meet our savings goals in fiscal years 2023 through 2026. In fiscal year 2023, DOI will reduce our budget by approximately $1.97 million. That reduction will come in part from the 33 positions we have eliminated already, and we will evaluate other discretionary spending that we can cut, such as renegotiating some contracts. Our proposed budget for fiscal year 2023 is $49.2 million, $28 million for personal services and $21.2 million for other than personal services. When the fiscal year starts in July, we anticipate receiving $4 million in forfeiture funds, principally federal forfeiture that resulted from criminal investigations and which can be used for law enforcement purposes other than salaries, and $1.8 million in intra-city funds that support staffing. These additional funds would supplement DOI's budget, bringing it to $55 million for fiscal year 2023, and would allow us to maintain our staffing at about the same level as it was in fiscal year 2022. DOI worked hard to make these budget reductions, and we are proud to do our part to help the city close the deficit. But I cannot emphasize enough the deep impact that the loss of staffing has on DOI's ability to fully meet its mission and mandate. It is my belief that the city receives an invaluable return from each DOI investigator, namely in the identification and prevention of corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse. I'd like now to speak a bit about our work over the past year. Our investigations demonstrate the important role we play in ensuring that New Yorkers have the honest government that they deserve. To give just a few examples, in 2021, we investigated construction-related misconduct, alleged attempts to bribe city employees in connection with procurement, and individuals who took advantage of vulnerable New Yorkers in need of housing. We also focused on schemes related to the COVID pandemic, including the submission of fake vaccination cards to city agencies. One matter that we worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York and the Office of Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Labor resulted in charges against 4 individuals who falsely claimed to be healthcare workers and sold hotel rooms intended for COVID isolation to ineligible individuals, defrauding the government of approximately $400,000. COVID-19 related fraud remains an active area of investigation for DOI. Now let me turn to a few specific priority areas. The flow of contraband into the city's jails has long been a DOI focus. An illegal trade facilitated by visitors, tainted mail, and in some cases, employees and officers of the Department of Correction. This illegal activity not only damages the reputation of the department and the vast majority of its employees who are honest public servants, it also makes their jobs even more dangerous and challenging. Most recently, in partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District and the FBI, our work led to arrests of 9 current and former correction employees and officers charged with taking cash bribes in exchange for smuggling scalpels, drugs, and cell phones to inmates. DOI has sought to improve conditions in the city jails in other ways as well. When concerns were raised about correction staff missing work without a legitimate reason, leaving their fellow officers in a dangerous situation due to understaffing, DOI conducted more than 6,000 home visits to correctional staff to verify the reason for their absence. This examination, which included conducting surveillance and a review of relevant documents, uncovered hundreds of violations of correction department regulations and led to suspensions, resignations, and the return of more than 200 officers and staff to their posts. DOI also monitors complaints relating to excessive force, sexual abuse, and sexual harassment within the jails, well over 2,000 such complaints per year. These reviews have led to policy and procedural recommendations to rectify systemic shortcomings, administrative enforcement actions, and criminal referrals to prosecuting authorities. One such referral led to an unprecedented prosecution handled with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, in which a uniformed corrections supervisor who allegedly issued orders that prevented officers from saving an inmate's life was charged with criminally negligent homicide and making a false filing. Let me take a moment now to discuss tackling corruption in the public funding of nonprofits that provide essential services to New York City, which has long been a part of DOI's core mission. In November 2021, DOI issued a comprehensive report proposing improvements to the city's budgeting, invoicing, and auditing of billions of dollars in nonprofit human service contracts that the city awards. And just last month, the former CEO of the city-funded Wrong Parent Housing Network pleaded guilty to conspiracy to enrich himself in a bribery and kickback scheme in connection with an investigation we conducted, again with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District. Because the nonprofit provides critical services and the city wanted to continue working with it, DOI recommended and secured an integrity monitor to oversee its operations, reported to DOI. In light of that criminal investigation and ongoing concerns about city-funded homeless service providers, in February of 2021, DOI embarked on a comprehensive review of these providers, a Herculean and unprecedented task. The city's Department of Social Services worked with DOI to identify almost 70 Department of Homeless Services shelter providers for review, and DOI procured 2 integrity monitors to provide forensic accounting and investigative support. DSS is leading a review of the provider's sexual harassment policies, also with the monitor's support. DOI's review is intended to identify any issues that may reflect on the provider's integrity or violate city contracts, such as conflicts, related party transactions, nepotism, or financial mismanagement. As DOI reviews the materials obtained from these providers, it will determine the appropriate next steps, driven as always by the facts that we find. I'd like to turn now to the NYPD, and as this committee is aware, DOI conducts investigations and makes recommendations related to the policies and practices of the police department through DOI's Office of Inspector General for the NYPD. In December of 2020, as part of DOI's investigation of the PD's response to the George Floyd protests, we also examined the history and current state of affairs of police oversight in New York City. Among other things, we recommended that the mayor and city council consider consolidating existing police oversight functions into a single agency headed by an independent board. I believe consolidating these currently overlapping functions has merit, and I continue to study the new structure that the report proposed, recognizing that change along these lines must have the support of the mayor's office and this council, and will take considerable time to thoughtfully implement. In the meantime, I want to assure this committee and all New Yorkers that DOI will continue to provide robust oversight of the NYPD. To that end, I have already met with the acting inspector general for that unit am in the process of reviewing their ongoing matters. Prior to my arrival, DOI began taking steps to fill the Inspector General position, and I am committed to hiring a high-quality candidate with relevant law enforcement experience who understands the complexities of police oversight in New York City, as well as how to advance investigations. I'd like to spend a minute on DOI's background investigations backlog. You are aware of that backlog and our extensive efforts to address it in recent years. I'm proud to report that those efforts have been successful. We began tackling these backlogged investigations in the summer of 2019. We hired additional investigators with extra funding provided by the city and supported by this council. DOI restructured the background unit, and in just over 2.5 years, we have cut the backlog by 75%. From 6,500 open background investigations in the summer of 2019 to approximately just under 1,600 currently open now. We expect to complete the remainder in the next 18 months. And with respect to new background applications that we receive, in fiscal year 2022, our average time to completion is 73 days. Let me speak for just a moment about DOI's use of monitors. Our integrity monitorship program has been used in dozens of oversight matters, and it allows DOI to expand its oversight of critical contracts and large infrastructure projects, and thereby help prevent and deter wrongdoing. The program also enables companies with integrity issues to continue to do business with the city if they fund an independent monitor to oversee their projects, reporting to DOI. Currently, there are 11 integrity monitorships that report to DOI, 7 paid for by the vendors and 4 paid by the city. DOI maintains regular contact with the monitors to stay informed of any issues identified, to plan next steps, and to ensure that the monitor's work and budget aligns with DOI's expectations. Let me now turn to address our new need requests. Over the last 2 weeks, I have worked with my executive team to better understand the challenges that DOI is currently facing and the improvements we need if we are to maintain and strengthen our ability to pursue our core investigative mission. Simply put, to do our work as well and as thoroughly as possible, we need to hire and train more people, and we need to retain the people that we hire. That's fundamentally the basis for the majority of our funding requests, which I will walk through now. While all of DOI's staff is critical to our success and supports our investigative mission, the investigators themselves are foundational to our mandate. While we recognize the need for budget cuts in the current environment citywide, it is important to note that these cuts impact our agency differently. They have left many of our squads seriously understaffed, limiting our investigative capabilities. DOI can and will continue to adapt to our current staffing to the best of our ability, but we will need to make some very hard choices without additional personnel. As I said at the outset, we request an additional $1.3 million to make certain improvements to both staffing and structure. We will use these funds to hire 12 additional investigators at the entry level and 6 other investigative staff comprised of 3 auditors, 2 attorneys, and an engineering auditor, and to fund the promotion of certain existing staff. First, we seek funding to implement a title structure and a path to promotion within the agency that we believe will reduce the rate of attrition. Over the last 20 months, due both to attrition and hiring restrictions, our staff was reduced by approximately 16%. That attrition, we think, is due in part to the lack of a transparent and consistent title structure for investigators across the agency, and thus an absence of clear opportunities for advancement. Furthermore, with respect to some of our investigators, their experience does not currently align with their title and salary. Therefore, we plan to create a consistent 3-tier title structure and to bring experience, title, and salary into alignment. This plan will require that we promote and give raises to certain members of our staff, and thus will require approximately $200,000 in additional funding. We anticipate that this shift will directly and positively impact retention and recruitment. Second, we seek funding to hire additional investigators. To meet these needs, we are seeking approximately $1.1 million for a total of 18 additional investigative fines. 12 of those, as I mentioned, will be entry-level investigative hires. We want to train them together as part of a new program that aims to provide a common understanding of investigative best practices and to prepare these new investigators for assignment to any squad within DOI. 6 additional investigators will join one of our recently established squads that focuses on the large infrastructure agencies within the city, including the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Design and Construction. We note that DOI also seeks funding to meet the city's requirements and best practices concerning confidential and sensitive data storage, as well as to comply with the newly enacted EO 86 concerning the retention of an outside auditor to review DOI's compliance with certain data access procedures. To meet these requirements, we are asking for an additional approximately $709,000. DOI's mission and its investigations transcend any one administration or commissioner. And over the last 2 weeks, I have seen the importance of DOI's legacy as well as its day-to-day impact on New York City. I am committed to continuing its vital work, and I am grateful for this committee's support. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We've been joined by Councilmember Juan. Councilmember, I believe you had a baby yesterday or recently, so we are very impressed. I want to say that. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to start some questions, and then I hope my colleague will jump in because I have no reason to believe that I have all of the questions that need to be asked. So I think one of the questions, of course, is the monitor program. And you talked about police, correction, and certainly homeless. And I just want to ask a little bit more about that because the monitors are certainly something that are confused probably with other kinds of monitors that exist in the city of New York. So I believe you created the program to work with companies that may not be able to do business with the city due to integrity issues and the companies can be awarded contracts if they agree to this outside independent monitor. And you mentioned that in your testimony. So do you believe that this program has accomplished the mission and the goals over the last 2 fiscal years? And it's great that we have these wonderful staffs because many of us are new and the staffs continue to talk about what happened in the past in a very realistic and honest fashion. And I just wanted to know how the program has it made progress and what is some of the budget implications? So the monitor in general, I think, is an ongoing issue that the public and all of the council were all interested in. And thank you.
Thank you for that question. So I do think the program has been very successful. And I want to emphasize, as you noted, that there are really sort of 2 components to the kind of monitoring that we do. So the first type, as you noted, is actually funded by the vendor that wants to provide services to the city, but that has had integrity issues in the past. And there are circumstances in which some of those vendors are uniquely situated to provide those services. And it's for that reason that despite the integrity issues, the city wishes to continue working with them. And in those situations, we are able, at no expense to the city, because the expense is borne by the monitor, to appoint a monitor that DOI selects through a competitive bidding process, that DOI oversees, and that DOI closely works with to ensure that the monitor is fulfilling its responsibilities. And so that's, I think, a very successful model that is both cost effective and also ensures to the extent possible that any integrity issues will be promptly identified and addressed so that the city can continue to do business with those providers. There are a number of other situations where DOI will retain and fund the monitor. One of them, in this case, is a monitor that oversees a review of homeless service providers. And the funding in that case, although it appears as part of DOI's budget, is actually provided by the mayor. That's a $3 million monitorship project, and that actually arose out of DOI's observation in connection with the criminal prosecution that I mentioned. Arose out of our observation that there were service providers that might have integrity issues, and this monitor is conducting a comprehensive review of that. Now that is funded by the city. but identifying this is sort of a systemic issue that we want to identify and address immediately. And so, yes, it's our view that that is also a productive and ultimately cost-effective approach for the city to take. We're going to continue possibly to work with a number of these homeless service providers. We want to make sure that we're strengthening their contracting and that we're identifying any integrity issues they might have.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to belabor it because it's not 100% a budget issue, but on the first case, how often when the company pays do you get reports and how do you get them? And in the second case, I must admit, homeless services is something I know really well. It does seem to me, and this may not be your decision, that as time goes on, we should just switch companies who are, providing the support services for those who are homeless, because then we save the money for the monitor. But I guess that may not be your decision, but to me, if somebody's not providing the services, I want to get rid of them. But in the first case, how do you communicate? And in the second case, how long do these monitors last? Or maybe there's no time period.
So our Inspector General teams, as I understand it, are in direct contact with the monitor. I actually can't give you, I know it's regular contact. I can't give you, a specific figure in terms of frequency. I'm sure I could get that number for you, but there is a robust and ongoing dialogue that I would imagine occurs as often as it needs to. So with some of the specifics of how long the monitorship is, I believe is determined by specific arrangement with each monitor. Again, I could get you more granular details on that. And I think to some extent may go with the length of the project at issue. Just to speak briefly to your second point, my understanding, because in fact I had the same question of why would we continue to work with folks who we think might have integrity issues. It's my understanding that there are circumstances where certain service providers may be the only ones that can provide those particular services in that particular context. And that's why a decision is made, to continue working with them. I obviously can't speak to all of them. There may be some exceptions there and room for reconsideration, but that's my understanding. And I believe that is a decision, as you know, that's made by the city.
Right, and I'll work on that later. So I appreciate those answers. Just in terms of headcount, because I know you brought it up and certainly I did, you have a headcount that's on loan to other agencies. And I know this is not uncommon in the city of New York. So can you talk, as you did a little bit in your testimony, about the agencies that you collaborate with, the details of the responsibility? And I think you mentioned this, but just again, how many staff are currently on loan to other agencies?
Okay, so in terms of on loan to other agencies, just to be clear, the way I understand this is that we actually have staff from other agencies that are quote unquote on loan to us. And I'll note that they make up the total headcount figure that I gave you. But when we talk about reducing positions, we're not talking about reducing those positions. We're talking about reducing positions that are either funded by our budget or are funded through funds provided by other agencies, just to make that clear, as distinct from agencies like NYCC or Health and Hospitals. And agencies is not exactly the right term for those entities, but that provide us with personnel who they pay, but who are part of our Inspector General squads and report up through the DOI chain. So that's how that breakdown.
Those are the ones, yeah, those are ones I was talking about. So those are the ones that I was mentioning. I guess the issue is you've got some that loan to you, and then you, in a sense, loan to others. It's sort of like back and forth. Am I right about that?
I don't think, Chair Brewer, that we actually loan back to other agencies. Those folks that come to us are really they're full members of our IG squads. They, report up through the same chain. They do the same work. And they're sort of fully a part of DOI. We don't, as far as I'm aware, sort of loan out folks to other agencies. We do have certain offices that are on site where we have folks on site at particular agencies, but they are still very much part of DOI.
Okay, that's clear. And then, of course, what makes you so special is that you're independent from the mayor, from the city council, and that gives the public lots of hope that you will do what I think is correct, which is to not be impacted by elected officials. So how do you, as commissioner, value this independence, plan to make it clear so that you can do your work independently. And again, this is somewhat of a budget issue, but also just somewhat of making clear exactly what your agency does so the public understands it.
I think it's absolutely critical, and thank you. It's always nice to get this question and to have some time to talk a little bit about how important this is. I think fundamentally the best way to show that we are independent is not so much by saying that we're independent, which I'm happy to say over and over again, and which we do say internally and externally, but by the way we do our work, right? Which means that when a complaint comes in, regardless of who it might reflect poorly on or what agency it might involve, we just follow the facts. We take a look at what the allegation is, and then we take the standard necessary steps to investigate it. And then, depending on what we find, that will dictate where the investigation goes. Is it a criminal referral? Does it go back to the agency? Is it potentially an issue that warrants a broader investigation that might result in a public report, something that might propose some systemic changes? But all of that is dictated by the facts that we find. And I think that is the best, and then making those investigations and those reports public to the extent that we can is the very best way to be independent and to show that we're independent.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I think that's what people want to understand is the role of your agency. And one other question, again, is somewhat budget related and somewhat to understand. I don't know how many city agencies there are, but I believe you have 45 mayoral agencies that you have oversight. And then, of course, there are the city boards, not to mention all of the other, what I call the quasi-city. You mentioned NYCC, Health and Hospitals, certainly Department of Education. So my understanding is that you do not have oversight over the Department of Education. You could explain that. That has come up in the past in different forums. So can you talk about the ones that, making it clear, am I right about what you do have oversight? And are there other public organizations or areas in the city that you except for DOE, that you don't have oversight on that would be thought to be that you should or that you do so that the public understands?
Right. So there are a broad range of mayoral agencies and non-agency entities that we do have oversight of. I have to say, I don't want to sort of presume to speak comprehensively here or to identify those that we do or we don't that folks might not be aware of, because I am frankly still, as you know, in a learning process myself. But I certainly think that to the extent that I or others here become aware of areas where we think perhaps we should be exercising oversight, or perhaps we should have oversight where we don't, that's the sort of thing that I would want to be in a continuing dialogue, with this committee and others about. So we are certainly thinking all the time, not just about doing the work in front of us, but are there other areas where we should be active? And so I appreciate the opportunity to think more about that and to continue that discussion.
But just Department of Education, that is its own integrity discussion commissioner and so on, right? Am I right about that? That's a separate entity.
Yes, as configured, the special commissioner for there's a special commissioner of investigations for the school system, and that role serves as the commissioner of investigation for the Department of Education. That's right.
Okay, and then you talked about, I think, again, people.
And just to be clear, we do have some oversight of that function, but it also functions independently of us. So we receive annual reports, we receive other reports of substantiated closed investigations, but it's a very different relationship than, say, the relationship we have, obviously, with our inspector generals who we supervise directly.
And I know the issue of asset forfeiture, we often hear about the district attorneys having the asset forfeitures. I don't think people understand that you do also. So that was very helpful when you mentioned it. So again, the November plan added $4.7 million in federal funding from the Department of Justice for federal asset forfeiture. And I think in the past, there have been varying values. So just generally, how do you use federal asset forfeiture funding, and what causes variation in the amount received? And if you want to talk a little bit more just generally about asset forfeiture, I think people would appreciate that, because it does have an impact hopefully positively on your budget, or at least you can't use it for personnel. I know that's very clear, but there may be other things you can use it for.
Right. So this is an important issue too. I'm happy to speak a bit about this. Cases that result in there are state and federal cases that can result in asset forfeiture. And forfeiture is really the return of ill-gotten gains. Forfeiture is different from restitution, just so folks are clear on that. If there's a victim of a crime and if someone has been defrauded, for example, or an agency has been defrauded, funds can be returned to that agency. That's called restitution as part of the resolution of a criminal or civil case. There's actually civil forfeiture, but we can keep it simple for the moment and stick to criminal forfeiture. So funds can be returned to victims. Restitution is really ill-gotten gains that comes back to the government. There may be no identifiable victim, or there may be other reasons why the funds should be returned through the forfeiture channel as opposed to restitution. When our investigations result in forfeiture under the federal forfeiture program, we can get a share of those forfeiture funds. And so what determines how much forfeiture we have is really what our cases generate. So the $4 million that's going to become part of our budget comes from historical cases. I believe that funding is principally from the city time case that we did with the Southern District, which was a very significant case a number of years ago involving fraud in the city's in the building out of the city's payroll system. And we have additional forfeiture funds from that investigation that we may draw down in recent years, and we can really use those funds for any law enforcement purpose other than salaries. We can use it for training, we can use it for equipment, we can use it for vehicles. It's quite a long list. What we can't use it for is salaries. And the other thing that it's really important for this committee to understand in the budget context is the forfeiture program rules say explicitly it is not supposed to be used to supplant other funding that we get, because the goal of the program is to incentivize agencies like ours to participate in these investigations that may generate these significant returns that we can then share in. So you can see how if those funds were used to allow us to get less budgeted money from the city, for example, that would really defeat the purpose of the program. But it is obviously a source of important funding. You know, we can use it to improve our computer systems. We can use it to do training we might not otherwise be able to do. So it's very valuable and significant for us, but it is not intended to replace what our other budgeted items that we'd otherwise be entitled to.
One suggestion, although I hope this fits, is to find a way to, the word I would use is advertise is probably a better one, city employees and the public about how not to be corrupt and to do the right thing, because that would help improve government in general. That might be something to think about, because in a creative way. And I know there's a policy and procedure recommendation portal, basically to inform the public on recommendations, sort of picking up on what I just said. And how is this portal updated, and how do agencies, do they have a requirement to respond to the recommendations? Because I know, I assume others know that the way that you operate is you hopefully figure out what has been corrupt, waste, fraud. You can't always make you can make the recommendation and then we hope the agency follows it. That's sometimes up to us to get the agency to do the right thing in terms of following and doing the updating of what they've done wrong and fixing it. But I just want to know, how often is the portal updated, and how do you respond to some of these recommendations in terms of getting the agency doing what you can to get the recommendations followed up on?
So the portal is regularly updated with the issuance of policy and procedure recommendations. So again, I can't give you sort of the hours or days, but it is promptly updated every quarter with the recommendations that we've issued. We then also track, and this is available on our public website, the agency's implementation of those recommendations, because as you say, we don't sort of have an enforcement arm in the sense that we can't otherwise force them to comply, but we do make public whether they've complied, whether they're planning to comply, whether they've rejected our recommendations. And then we also work closely with the agency. I think this is where having collaborative relationships with the various city agencies is very important, because it's our goal to have our recommendations implemented and also to make recommendations that are realistic and can be implemented. Those agencies, of course, have their own limitations, budget-wise and otherwise. So we both want to make sure that what we're proposing is useful and rigorous, but realistic. And the agencies, I think, are incentivized in part to comply with our recommendations because it is made public how they respond.
Okay. I think a lot of people are interested because the hits us are in the backlog. And I know you mentioned that it's in much better shape than it has been in the past. Obviously, those who are trying to get people hired want to make sure that it is something they can do in an expeditious fashion. So one thing that I was not familiar with, but that's probably me, is when we talk about Executive Order 86, concerning the retention of an outside auditor to review certain data access procedures, you're requesting $700,000. So can you talk a little bit more about this role within the executive order? What does this data access procedures, does DOI need to support? Now, obviously this is not directly related to hiring, but we're all trying to figure out both about data and about hiring. Let's just talk about the 700,000. I'm not familiar with the order, so maybe you could talk about that too.
Sure. So the executive order, as I understand it, requires us, and there are really two components of the 700,000 request, I believe, but one of them relates to the executive order's requirement that we retain a monitor to essentially audit our handling of other agencies' data that we access and store. And you can understand, given our role, that there is a lot of information that we're getting, and we need to make sure that we're handling it appropriately. And given that it is a city requirement that we retain an auditor for that purpose, that's an additional needs request for which we're seeking funding.
Okay. And then I want to just one more question also about the city marshals, because that does come up quite a bit. And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues because I could go on forever and I know they have questions. So the issue of city marshals, those of us in the community, when we hear city marshals, we know they have a job to do. But when we hear city marshals, we think about housing and evictions, and we get concerned because we don't want people to get evicted. Obviously, some people don't pay the rent and there are challenges, but we try to keep people in their homes. And so they are regulated by you, appointed by the mayor for 5 years. And I wanted to know how you, as the commissioner, oversee the marshals. What resources are there allocated to do oversight? Are there vacant positions? I know the difference between a marshal and a sheriff, but maybe others may not. And so you might want to talk about that for a minute.
Sure. So first of all, I don't know exactly how many positions and whether there are any vacant positions allocated to city marshal oversight. I can certainly get back to you on that. And I also want to make clear that we do not have oversight over the eviction process. That's a housing court process. But to speak to what I think, is a concern of this committee and where we do have oversight is in the context of an eviction. The marshals may learn sometimes not until they show up at someone's home that the person to whom the eviction order pertains is someone who is not really able to advocate for themselves. They may be disabled, they may have other limitations, they may not be able to move, and they may not really be positioned to take advantage of the city services that might otherwise be provided to them. And one of the things that we do is that we facilitate the marshals referring those folks to adult protective services where they can get the kind of support that they need. And that referral also delays the eviction process. So I think that is a particularly significant type of oversight that we provide. Now, as far as I'm aware, and I believe this is for fiscal year 2022, but don't quote me, it could be for calendar year, there have been relatively few evictions. I think we're looking at a number in the low 300s, whereas in years past it was much higher, and in the intervening years during the pandemic, it's gone down almost to zero. But I can certainly get back to you on the funding and lines issue, but but certainly we, I think, have been successful in facilitating these referrals to adult protective services and then dealing with adult protective services as they go through the process of evaluating whether or not someone should be evicted and what support they need.
I appreciate that. And those of us in the community, we know how great the marshals are. We know how great APS is. In both cases, they send, as you say, red flags into all of us in the fear of God, because APS has challenges also. Just FYI, for those of us who do constituent work. I have many more questions, but why don't I see if any of my colleagues have questions? Just jump in. I know you could raise the flag, but feel free to jump in if you have any questions. Anybody have questions?
Chair, I see Councilmember Ayala has her hand raised.
Go right ahead, council member.
Good morning, everyone. I have a couple of questions. First, I wanted to know if you could share with us what the number of cases that are currently on backlog is, and how are new cases prioritized?
And let me just clarify, when you're talking about cases, you're talking about investigations, like, are you talking about complaints, really?
Yeah.
Okay, that seems like the right number. Let me see if what I can tell you is that in terms of complaints that we received, I can give you the number of complaints that we received in the first 4 months of fiscal year 2022. And that was 4,308 complaints, which if you annualize that number, we're looking to be higher for this fiscal year than we were for fiscal years 21 and 20, which is what we would expect given given that we're coming out of the pandemic. Complaints are only one way that we obtain cases, of course. So just to be clear, there are many other ongoing investigations that come from other sources. So it's a bit difficult to sort of give you a figure in terms of completed matters versus complaints. But that's the number of currently pending complaints, at least for those first 4 months.
I mean, it's a pretty significant number. And my concern is, if we have staffing issues, if the agency is not, adequately staffed at the moment, then does this, I would imagine, extend the length of time that it takes to remediate complaints and look into, and to, I guess, fully investigate the more serious complaints that are coming into the agency?
So I very much appreciate that concern, and it's a concern that we have also in terms of staffing. I will say that it's my understanding that where we're really affected in the decreased staffing is not so much in our ability to review and act on complaints. Although I think it's a good point that there certainly could be some delay. I don't have a precise answer to that right now, but I think the bigger issue that we're focused on is our ability to do the kind of systemic investigations that take more time, that take more people. And that's where I think we're more likely to see a decrease if we can't have the staffing that we need. So I think there's certainly a possibility that overall, when you have fewer people, your response time is delayed to some extent. But I see the real impact is in limiting our ability, let's say, to take a particular complaint and say, okay, we've addressed this complaint, but is there some broader issue here? Let's get more data. Let's get an auditor involved. Let's take a look at this issue more broadly. And not every complaint rises to that level, of course, but there are going to be many that do. I think that's where we've got to make those hard choices that I alluded to. And that's where I do think it's important that we get the additional staffing that we're seeking.
What is the agency headcount again? I think I missed it.
I'm sorry?
What is your headcount now? I missed it.
So our current headcount is 581. And half of those positions approximately are funded through our budget, and half of them are funded through either other, as we discussed, other entities for whom we have folks on loan, or positions that are funded through what we'll call intra-city lines.
Gotcha.
And just to give you another, figure, the reduction in our staffing since fiscal year 2020 until through fiscal year 2022 has been a total reduction in staffing of 40 lines. So that's quite a significant number relative to our total.
It is. And then the other problem, council member, is that OMB is very slow on 11 positions, which they have not filled, which could be filled. It takes forever. And then she has listed some new needs, which are desperately needed in addition to the cut. So I hope I will certainly be advocating for more funding. And you and I agree that they do need them.
I agree. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Otherwise, I'll keep going. Okay. The other question I have, just picking up, I think if you want to talk a little bit more about the new needs, that would be helpful. I know you talked about it in your testimony, but if there's something you want to add to that and something more about the 11 positions that I mentioned that are not filled thanks to OMB.
So those positions are, I believe, principally for new investigators. Let me speak a little bit about that. So we've got some new investigator positions that we are able to fill, i.e. we do have those lines available, but due to the hiring restrictions, which at one point we were limited to hiring one person for every 3 people who left, we're now at hiring one person for every 2 people who leave. So we have, in addition to the vacant lines that we've had to cut, we also have open positions that we are entitled to fill, but there's a delay in doing that. So that is certainly one issue. But let me just sort of give a little more color to the positions that are the subject of the new needs request. So I've spoken a bit about the promotional structure that we want to put in place, and that's very straightforward. There are already 3 tiers in terms of salary within our entry-level investigator group, and we just need to appropriately align the experience and title of folks with their salary. And I do think that for incentivizing our investigators to remain with us so that the training that we give them and the work that we do to get them up to speed isn't wasted, it is very important for people to see a path to promotion and a path to advancement. And so that's a relatively small change budget-wise, $200,000, but I think important. Of course, equally important are the additional investigative lines that we want to add back as part of the new needs request, add back from what we've had to cut. And those fall into 2 areas. We have the entry-level investigators, and it is critical, obviously, that we bring new people in, that we train them. One of the reasons that we want to bring them in as a cohort, as a group, is that enables us to much more efficiently put them through a training program that will then set them up for success while they're here, so that they understand what the best practices are, their various, things to learn when you become an entry-level investigator. It's very important, as I said, that we work also to the highest standard in the way we conduct ourselves. The training is designed to ensure that. And then we are able to deploy those investigators to the squads where they're most needed. The other area that makes up the remainder of the additional lines is also, I think, quite important. We have a relatively newly established investigative squad intended to expand oversight over the city's main capital project agencies. And I mentioned that's Department of Environmental Protection, Design and Construction, and also DET. They are responsible for the majority of New York City's major capital projects. So that's construction of public buildings and facilities, water mains, sewers and tunnels, transportation infrastructure. These are billion-dollar projects. And what we want to be able to do is get out ahead of them with an engineering auditor, with other auditors, and with more staffing, so that we can really play a proactive role in ensuring that those projects are not subject to waste, fraud, and abuse. And that's an area where I think we will more directly be able to see the impact of our work, because on these massive projects, there really are significant opportunities for corruption if we're not watching closely. And so really those are, I think, the critical aspects of the new needs request.
All right, that makes sense to me. And I think picking up on that, one of the concerns that I know, again, the public is interested in is you would certainly need such, I think, more staff to do systemic investigations. And maybe you could talk about that so people know what I'm talking about, which is maybe something where there's a red flag, as you talked. And then, and of course, those that are, the individual who is stealing money on at an agency basis. There are two different types of investigation. So picking up on Councilmember Ayala, will this new needs, you think, be able to also enable you to do the systemic investigations as well as everything else? And we've been joined by, I believe, Councilmember Krishnan. Thank you very much for joining us. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Yes, I think it will. I mean, that is part of the point of making sure that we have sufficient staffing. And when we talk about systemic investigations, I would say that they're different, but often related to sort of responding to complaints and whistleblower allegations that could be very discreet. And let me explain what I mean by that. It may be that there is a particular complaint that we get from an agency, let's say relating to an issue with procurement. And although the complaint may be quite discreet, we may see when we really press on that issue that there are problems in contracting and budgeting and invoicing more broadly. And a good example of this is the report that we did concerning nonprofits and the billions of dollars that nonprofits are receiving from city agencies to perform these vital services, right? That's the kind of investigation that I would describe as systemic and that we need significant personnel in order to conduct. They're more time consuming. They require sometimes extensive review of records, interviews of numerous people involved in the process. So there's a lot of work involved in not just responding to a discrete complaint that may result in a criminal prosecution, for example, but in then looking broadly at the issue identified in that narrow case and seeing whether it really poses a broader concern or application. The other thing that I want to mention is how I hope to use data analytics also to identify areas that, again, may result in more narrow examples of fraud and abuse, but I think also could help us identify systemic areas for reform. And that's basically to take the vast amounts of data that these city agencies generate and apply algorithms and searches that we can run over vast amounts of data to look for anomalies, to look for spending that looks out of whack, to look for services that for various reasons don't seem to be being performed or couldn't be performed at the dates and times that the invoices would suggest. And this is also something that requires not just a data analytics team, which we have recently stood up and who are really well positioned to do this work, but very close collaboration with our investigative squads who know the agencies and know the types of data that they maintain and also know the way procurement or grants or other acts that those agencies undertake are supposed to work. You have to know both things to know when something you're seeing in the data is an anomaly. And that's an area where that also takes time and personnel and something that we very much want to pursue and have wanted to pursue for some time. And we now have the data analytics capability, but we need to make sure we have sufficient investigative staff in order to move those types of projects forward. And this is at a very preliminary stage, but I think it's a very promising and efficient way for us to get to areas that we might not otherwise see, that might not for a long time be the subject of a complaint, that we can hopefully sort of proactively identify and then address.
I'm a big believer in data analytics, and I think all agencies should be doing the same. So I appreciate your understanding of it. We talked about some of the Department of Education and what you're able to get out of them, but you do have oversight over the police department in this realm, the Office of Inspector General. And it's probably the most interesting to the public, I have to say. And I know you talked a little bit about maybe a new way of looking at the agencies that comprise or oversight of the police department. That probably is somewhat controversial, but it's not controversial, obviously, to have a fully funded Office of Inspector General for the police department. I know you mentioned that you're working to staff it up. But I wanted to know about the, a little bit more about what you are doing to staff it up, because there are an awful lot of vacancies there in addition to the leadership. I believe that the staffing is 39 budgeted positions, but as of January, only 19 of the 39 were filled. And I know that we want to make sure too, that in addition to what you talked about for your agency, that these two people stay, they come in on entry level, they, goodness knows, get trained. And I don't think they're particularly highly paid. So obviously what you might want to do is some higher paid, more skilled investigators. So I just want to know if you could talk a little bit more about this portion of your work.
Absolutely. So, as you know, the IG squad for the NYPD plays a very important role. They really are focused principally on systemic investigations, right? Identifying areas of improvement and reform for the NYPD. And we do have fewer, as you point out, we do have significant vacancies in that squad. And that is in part because of the hiring restrictions that I've mentioned. We certainly are actively seeking hires in those positions. We are also mindful that since we are in the process of finding a new inspector general, as you know, Phil, you previously had that position left at the end of last year. We are also mindful that that person will have some thoughts about hiring. And so we do, now that we are actively looking for someone to fill that role, we do want to allow some flexibility so that that person, can have a say in the staffing, but it is definitely a priority. We have posted for the IG position. We're actively looking at resumes. We've got some excellent candidates. It's a very important position. So it's certainly, at the top of my list in terms of vacancies to fill. Absolutely.
Okay. And of course, within the DOI world, you would, I assume, work a little bit with IAB, NYPDs, and also CCRB. So I'm just wondering, even though we're not necessarily talking about your vision, how do you work with them now in their current context, if at all?
Sure. So there are some overlapping functions that, there's some overlap in the mandate that our IG has with those entities. And one of the things that we do is we frequently get complaints that for that reason, due to the overlap, are more aptly suited for them. And so there's a referral process that we are actively receiving complaints and sort of giving them out to those entities where appropriate. So that's one of the main ways in which we work together. I think one of the issues with the overlap, and this is something that we flagged in our report on the George Floyd protests, is that the NYPD is receiving requests for documents and other information from multiple entities at once. And that has made, I think, their job more difficult in getting out information, and it's made our job more difficult in getting information. And this is something that, I look forward to speaking with the police commissioner about and trying to move forward, because I think it has made things to some extent more challenging for us, but the structure of these three different entities also makes it more challenging, I think, for the NYPD to provide information. So I think there's work to be done there to make that process, smoother and more efficient, whatever the right structure ultimately may be.
Okay, just on that topic, I'm always thinking about the public. So in some cases, either within the IG police department or just generally with DOI, some cases you can publish a report and some cases you can't. Can you just talk about under what circumstances you can or cannot publish a report? Because I know there is a difference.
Well, typically we publish reports when the issue that we're dealing with is a report of significant public interest. There are other situations where we may make reports and recommendations that we make public, but that don't warrant a report. The NYPD OIG squad's work really is principally to identify, systemic problems and issue reports. That's largely what they do. I could envision a situation where there's some law enforcement sensitive or confidential issue that might limit our ability. But generally that is the work that squad is doing.
Okay. All right. I think, okay. The background investigations, I mentioned this just earlier, but this is obviously of interest to city agencies in addition to, I guess, the public. And I know you and your predecessor did cut the time that it takes to do background investigations. So 2 questions. Even though I believe it's a lot less, is there some way to get it to be even more expeditious? Because we're all trying to, it just helps. You do get a lot of complaints in the sphere that it takes so long to join the city agencies. You hear about that all the time. And I don't know if it's DOI or if it's just the way that the agencies operate. So can that be cut? Does the extra funding for fingerprinting help, or is that just something that's completely separate? So my question is, how can we cut the time that it takes to get people background check? Although you never want to compromise, obviously, the investigation of any individual. Is there some discussion that could be taken there about background investigations?
I think there's almost nothing that can't be improved, but I have to say, in terms of the amount of time it now takes for us to review and complete a background investigation, we're at an average of 72 days. Obviously, for some it's less. That means for some it may be a little more. I think that's a fairly prompt number, and often, depending on the position, the person can begin work while their background investigation is still pending. So I think, at least for some positions, we are not a logjam in terms of people, beginning to work at the agencies, that are employing them. In terms of the fingerprinting work that we do, we are on a very fast turnaround, as I understand it. I was just looking into the numbers this morning. At least for childcare workers, for example, I believe our turnaround is less than 7 days. And just to be clear, we don't actually do the fingerprinting. That's done elsewhere. What we're doing is processing the information that we receive from those fingerprint checks, and we're able to do that in a it's a matter of days that we're able to turn that around at present. So I'm certainly open to hearing about any complaints or concerns about timeliness and to making any changes that we can make. But I do think our process has improved to the point that I would certainly be surprised and concerned and want to hear about any areas where we are the holdup.
Okay. I mean, the fingerprint, I just noticed this. It may not be an issue, but I'm always concerned. Childcare workers do not get paid very much, as we know. And notice that they have to pay $101, for that process. We all have to pay something when we get hired. But I just thought that was quite a bit. Maybe that is not a red flag, as we say, in terms of concern. But I think it's something that we should look at, because I know childcare workers get paid so little, but maybe I'm the only one complaining. I do not know. I worry about those workers all the time. So one of the, I would say, sister or brother agencies, of course, is District Attorney, all of the Southern District, Eastern District, NYPD. So how do you, we talked about NYPD, but how do you work with the other agencies and any others that are, might be appropriate to discuss at this hearing, District Attorney and the Southern District in particular? How do you work with them?
So I would describe all the prosecutors' offices that we work with, and that would be all of the DA's offices in the city, the U.S. Attorney's offices for the Southern and the Eastern Districts of New York. I would describe them as our law enforcement partners. And what I mean by that is, when we have an investigation that is at the appropriate stage where we recognize that it might be a matter that could lead to a criminal prosecution, and exactly when that is and how you make that decision varies by investigation. But we liaise with the appropriate office, and the appropriate office depends on the nature of the case, the location of the potential criminal conduct, our historical relationships with each of those offices, because some have experience with certain types of cases. So that's how we decide which office to work with. But my goal, as has been, my predecessor's practice, is to have excellent relationships with those offices, to bring them in, I would say, early and often, because the best criminal cases are made, in my experience, when law enforcement agents like us partner with prosecutors early on in a case. And those are excellent relationships. I think it's very important to maintain them and strengthen them, and that's what I intend to do.
Okay. A little bit more on the, I know you talked about the technology and how you're going to use some of the data analytics. Is that something that, how would, when you have a red flag as an example, how would data analytics play a role? How would that work in terms of the, or maybe the data analytics is the way that the red flag gets developed? Can you just be clarify that?
Yes, I think it's the latter. I think the idea is that ideally, what I'd like to do is to be able to take large amounts of data for any particular agency or even across agencies, and there's a lot of steps we have yet to go through before we're able to do that, and run programs that could identify anomalies in invoicing, something unexpected in terms of payment patterns. Some of these examples I sort of can't even imagine, but I know that they are going to be out there, where in the absence of a complaint, in the absence of a press report of misconduct, we could see something in the data where we can say that doesn't look right. It doesn't make sense that this should cost this and that should cost that, or that this vendor is invoicing for this and not for this. Whatever the patterns are that we'd be looking for, and like I said, that's very dependent on the individual agencies and the work that they do. But the idea would be, even in the absence of a complaint or some other red flag, that the data itself can give us a window into something that's not right. And we can then seek documents, conduct interviews, take all of the normal steps that we would when we got, let's say, a whistleblower type complaint. But we're doing it just based on patterns in data.
Okay. Again, if there are council member questions, let me know. I would be glad to participate with you. So outreach and education. I mentioned this when I spoke because I am concerned about the city contracts, certainly city employees, making sure they understand what your agency does so that they do the right thing. So I know you do outreach and corruption prevention. I assume you do lectures, e-learning, and so on. And so I'm wondering, DOI offered 449 of these lectures apparently in 2019 compared to 67 in 2021, understandably, because of the pandemic. But we wanted to know, how many are you planning, and can you describe the courses? How do they differentiate perhaps between contractors and city employees? Are they required by city employees? Should they be? And certainly for the same thing for contractors.
So with respect to city employees, we have a module that we distribute. I believe it's through DCAS. It goes out to the to I think all of the agencies that we cover, which is all of the agencies. And we are actually in the process now of getting that out. We do this on a regular basis. I don't think it's annually at the moment, but it's on a periodic basis. And we're in the process now as people are coming back to work and we don't have the sort of connection issues that, as you say, interfered with our ability to deliver these lectures during the pandemic. We're getting these out now, and we're seeking, as we always do, the agency heads support in ensuring that agency personnel are participating in this module and are getting the training that they need. We cannot require it, but it is something that we partner with the agencies to get compliance on. There are, I think, other opportunities for us to give lectures. So I think this is an area where we're going to continue to be active. We have been very active in the past with a dip during the pandemic. I think it's important not only for educating city employees, but it can also be something that prompts complaints, because as people hear from us, sometimes they come to appreciate something they may not have realized was something about which they should or could make a complaint is in fact something they should be speaking up about. And that's part of what the lectures are designed to encourage. What I can't speak to, although I could certainly get back to you on it, is what kind of training we do for contractors. I do know that when there is a monitor in place, the monitor plays a role in ensuring that the contractor, the vendor, has the right code of conduct, has the right policies and procedures in place. So that's a form of training. But in terms of training we give to non-city employees who are contractors or vendors, I would have to get back to you on that.
Or even if it's necessary, and I do think we do probably need to talk more about maybe making it more mandated, sexual harassment, et cetera, is mandated, something to think about. And I want to mention, I just come from the National League of Cities in Washington, DC, where I'm on boards and speaking at different committees. And the amount of money that is coming, thanks to the Biden administration, to entities around the United States, if they apply, is phenomenal. Obviously, we dealt with the issues of money for the pandemic, and now this is another sort of follow-up, something to think about, because there will be a lot more federal funding coming either on a competitive or as of right basis that would in fact need, I would think, some training along the lines that you just described. Councilmember Yeager, go ahead. Councilmember Yeager, yeah, go ahead. Can we, you want to ask your question?
Waiting for the magical mute button to, Madam Chair, since you left the council, we have a new process here where staff can mute council members and we're not allowed to talk unless the staff lets us.
We hear you, Councilmember. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, I just want to go back to what Madam Chair spoke about in her first round when she was briefly talking about the marshals. I want to just explore a little something with you. As you know, unlike the sheriff's office, which is an agency of the city and an officer of the city, the marshals are in essence solo practitioners who eat what they kill. And while you have oversight over them, it's a complaint-driven process where somebody who feels they're mistreated can file a complaint with DOI. You'll surely dispatch investigators, and within due course, it's looked at and a resolution of some sort. But that's not the immediate assistance I think that most New Yorkers who encounter a marshal problem need. Because something happens at 7 o'clock at night and you need to deal with the marshal. If you call the marshal's office, you're going to get, a 1982 answering machine that's going to tell you that they're not there and call back when you feel like it or not at all. And this is particularly at issue with regard to, yes, evictions, which may start up again, but it's also with regard to bootings and towings, particularly bootings. If they scoot around town, in the middle of the night, throwing boots on cars, and if you get to the boot 5 minutes after they're gone, there's nothing for you to do. And if it's a problem and you can't reach anybody, you're told call back tomorrow morning. And maybe they'll answer, maybe they won't. I'm wondering if you've ever explored, if you've had the chance, I know you're brand new there, to the idea of maybe having some kind of 24-hour help desk where New Yorkers can call DOI, since there really is no agency that's in charge of marshals other than you, that New Yorkers can get an answer and not just file a complaint, but actually get a caseworker who can reach out to a marshal, call their cell phone. I mean, marshals are not giving out their cell phones to regular New Yorkers, but surely your office has them all, to resolve problems in an emergency basis.
So that is not something that I've thought about. I'm not sure, I have to say, just listening, if that sort of fits fully within our wheelhouse, but I'm very happy to think more about it. This is not an area, that I have really any extensive knowledge. And so I would be happy to think more about whether that's appropriate for us to do and how it would work.
Okay, if you think that it may not be, I'm wondering if you can, instead of giving a no, give a suggestion, because there is no other agency in the city that can do this, because no other agency is empowered by law to oversee the marshals, and they really are rogue agents. They once they get their badge, they're on their own, and nobody watches over them. They don't have a boss. So you have marshals who have been doing this for 10, 20, 30 years, the same marshals, and they've it's like the Wild West. Without DOI establishing some kind of office, I'm not saying that you can do it with existing resources. You may need more, and it may need to be something that really gets fully thought out, perhaps with DUID, perhaps with some kind of 3-on-1 interplay. But I don't think there's another agency that can do it other than DOI. It's really the reason that I wanted to bring that up to you.
Well, I'm very happy to think about it. I don't think I'm not in a position to give you an informed answer at the moment, but I will definitely think about it, and we can have a further discussion.
Okay, and while we're on the topic, I'm wondering if you know at your fingertips how many complaints do get filed against marshals on an annual basis, if you're aware?
I don't know that number, but if it exists somewhere, which it might, I would be happy to track it down.
Okay, just curious. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And we've been joined by Councilmember Salamanca. Thank you very much. I talked a little bit about the portal, but I was just wondering, according to the Mayor's Management Report, the MMR, your portal has obviously talked about, as we said, all of the decision-making compliance and recommendations. According to the MMR, it includes information that indicates of the 573 recommendations issued in FY 2019, 85% have been accepted, 76% of the 85% have been implemented, and 11% are still pending an outcome, and 4 have been rejected. So I'm wondering, in addition to relating to the 11% still waiting for an outcome, how do you talk to the agencies about recommendations that should be taking place, in my opinion, and what is the sort of usual time period for an agency to respond to your policy and procedure recommendations? Do you follow up? I think we know that in the past it has taken a long time, perhaps, for the agencies to implement. Obviously, there are new agency heads. They may not know about the past. You're new, but I think that there are many people in the agencies who, thank goodness, continue. And we want to make sure that what is suggested gets implemented, because that's how agencies perform at their best. So it's that 11%. And also, I guess, in the future, how are you going to work on this really important issue?
So my understanding is that when we make a recommendation, we typically, although it may vary, and I can't speak for all of the ones we've made historically, I think we typically ask the agency to notify us within a limited period of time. I think it's often 30 days as to whether or not they're going to comply with our recommendation. And that can be sort of the starting point for a dialogue if there are issues. I think the 85% rate, given that they are not required to comply, is good. It obviously could be better. And I understand that there is a very regular dialogue between the inspector generals, who have the most direct and close line, to the agencies. That's a key part of their job, and that the dialogue around recommendations occurs principally through them. Obviously, if there's an issue, then that matter can be elevated. You had some very specific questions about the time it typically takes for implementation. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know whether we have an answer to that. As an agency, we may. If we do, I'd be happy to get it to you. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay. All right. I think those are mostly my questions. I think what we should do now is go to the public. I want to thank you very much. I think that as Councilmember Ayala said, and I certainly agree, we definitely need to have a support mechanism for getting you the new needs that you are suggested, and certainly working with OMB to fill those 11 positions. And we know that the job that you are doing has to be something that's really known to the public. I think that's one area, take some staffing, but take some thinking outside the box, ways in which we can understand what your agency does, and that it is there for the best of all of us. But it is not, I think, known what exactly Department of Investigation does, except it's like, the public understands that it deals with corruption, it deals with fraud, it deals with waste. But what does that mean for us individuals so that we do the right thing? And that's where, and I think we should be looking, given the vast amounts of federal money, as I indicated earlier. I was blown away by the amount of money that the Biden administration is making available. Infrastructure you talked about, if you're talking about DEP and you're talking about DDC, you're talking about infrastructure. And DOT, they're all going to be getting vast amounts of federal money. And I think, so we talked about the contractors in addition to city agencies. I think there needs to be a wholesale review of how we tell people what is or is not permitted in our city government. And that needs to be something that I hope we can focus on together.
Well, we thank you. I thank you very much for your support with respect to our staffing and our mission. I agree completely that of the money that is coming to the city, it would be, I think, a benefit the city as a whole for us to be able to use that to enhance what we do. And I look forward to working with you and with this committee on making that happen.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And now I'll turn it over to the staff to invite people who would like to testify. And thank you very much to my colleagues who joined us. Unless there are any other questions from council members? I don't see any raised hands, but if anybody wants to chime in, feel free. Doesn't seem like it. Okay, go ahead, staff, for the public. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. We'll now turn to public testimony. Please be advised that for this portion of the hearing, we'll be calling on individuals one by one to testify. Each panelist will be given 2 minutes to speak. Please begin once the sergeant has started the timer. Council members who have questions for a particular panelist should use the Zoom raise hand function. I will call on you after the panelists completed their testimony. For panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you and the sergeant at arms to set the timer and give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. And as a reminder, all hearing participants may submit written testimony of any length to testimony@council.nyc.gov up to 72 hours after the hearing. I'd now like to welcome Kelly Grace Price to testify, followed by Diana Prashad. Kelly Grace Price, you may begin upon the sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
Hi, good morning. I'm sorry, my internet connection is spotty. I'll be very brief. Thank you so much, Committee Chair Brewer. Every time I attend a committee hearing chaired by you, it's like a master class in government. This one, of course, reaps the same results. Thank you, Commissioner Stauber. Again, listening to you was educational today. My organization, Closed Rosies, is aimed at untwining the problems that women that turn to the criminal legal system in situations of abuse face. And specifically, I have gone to the Department of Investigation over the last decade several times seeking help. And I want to quickly talk about those instances. I'll turn in copiously detailed written testimony, but I want to talk about 3 main things very quickly in my minute remaining. I had gone to the Department of Investigations back in 2014, alleging that a large swath of victims were being eschewed by the criminal legal system and not getting justice. I was really whispering, foreshadowing the Me Too movement. My reports, I'm sure, are still in the Department of Investigation. A lot of the issues that I brought up are still unanswered. I would very much like to work with you, Commissioner Stauber. Also, I want to talk about the Department of Investigations working with the district attorneys. While I was on Rikers Island as an innocent person, I was victimized by Dr. Hansey, an investigation that Mark Peters brought to the Bronx DA. A criminal indictment was brought down on the physician's assistant to much fanfare in the press about the physician's assistant raping and sexually abusing and removing hundreds of uteruses and creating circumstances for unnecessary colposcopies for tens of dozens of women on Rikers. Those criminal charges were dropped mysteriously last year. And I'm wondering what kind of collaboration on the back end. Thank you. I think you understand my point. There's no recourse for district attorneys that drop DOI investigations. This one in particular, I'd like to shine a light on. And I hope to work with you. Please read my written testimony. Thank you so much, Kelly Grace Price, Closed Rosies.
Thank you.
I'd now like to welcome Diana Prashad to testify. Diana Prashad, you may begin upon the sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
We see that we've unmuted Diana's phone. Diana, if you are at your phone and can hear us, you're invited to testify.
Hi, can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes.
Hi, good morning, committee members and chair. I finally have the opportunity to address this committee for the first time. My name is Diana Prashad, and I'm a private citizen, taxpayer, and a homeowner who has been dealing with a dangerous situation. My wife and I are being discriminated against and retaliated against by HPD, DSS, while being blackballed by DOI for reporting corruption and fraud as perpetuated by these agencies. In 2007, I purchased my home through a HPD first-time home owners program. Homeowners in my development are bound by a 25-year owner's occupancy contract, which means that we are contractually and legally obligated to remain in these homes as our primary residency until 2032. Per our contract with HPD, HPD is supposed to monitor and enforce these covenants. However, they have not done so since January 2010. Moreover, due to this failure, a number of homeowners on my block that are part of this housing initiative have been illegally converted into rental properties in violation of our owner's occupancy clause in our contract, as well as the grant funded we received. From March 2020 to present, my wife and I have been dealing with safety and quality of life issues stemming from one of these illegal conversions, with this first-time homeowner is illegally renting out to a DSS City FEPS client and program. This means that HPD, the very agency that we are in contract with, is party to this breach. Since this illegal registration, the homeowner was able to submit to the city to receive rental vouchers while simultaneously breaching her contract. We as contractees in compliance who homes is attached to these legal conversions are left to deal with not only the consequences of this illicit scheme that affects our safety, and we're also dealing with quality of life issues from the displacement of DSS clients into our home, precluded from renting. Essentially, what's going on is that there are active city contracts. City contracts are being mismanaged by DSS and by HPD. DOI is aware of it. They're not doing anything about it. We have reported it. They're blocking us from filing complaints against these agencies.
Okay, Ms. Prashad, I just want to say thank you because I know you've been covered in the press, and I'm hoping that DOI will follow up and we'll follow up. And thank you very much for testifying.
Thank you. We'll submit our testimony shortly. Thank you so much, Ms. Brewer.
Thank you. I believe we've heard from all the registered witnesses who are on the call, but at this time, if you wish to testify and your name has not been called, please raise your hand using the Zoom raise hand function. And seeing no hands raised, I'll now turn it over to Chair Brewer for closing remarks.
Well, I certainly want to thank the staff and my colleagues who joined us. I think we have an exceptional commissioner who is focused on this agency. And I want to appreciate her testimony and her staff. I have to say that it's an incredibly important agency, and I think it needs to do more outreach. As I said earlier, I certainly support these increases in funding that she has requested, and hope that OMB fulfills their commitment to fulfill to allow the 11 spots that need to be funded in addition to the new needs. And perhaps in the future, she needs even more staff. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and there's lots of work to be done. Thank you very much, everyone. And this hearing is now concluded.